Assalamu alaikum and welcome to the program. It is exactly 3 after 11 o'clock, and that means you're with me, JulieAlli, right here on Salam Media on the mid-morning show. Great to be with you, my second week back, and loving it, absolutely loving it. Let's give you a rundown of what's happening on the show this morning, and inshallah, you can become a part of the conversation by connecting with us via any one of our social media platforms. We'll be talking with Nwabisa Nadia Sigaba, who is an independent researcher, and she is with the EFF. Can't wait for this interview to start happening because she talks about unemployment, social cohesion, and political instability as far as the youth of Africa is concerned. This is not a problem that is probably only playing out in Africa. I think it's a global issue. So we'll look at that one in much detail. Run for a Single Mom, a Family Fun Walk with Zakira Bika. She is a director, playwright, novelist, talk show host, and community activist. She's also written an autobiography called Drops of Clarity. So as you can see, we have amazing guests and possibly just not enough time to uncover anything and everything that we would like to. Then we'll be looking at the importance of a chiropractor. When exactly do you engage with the chiropractor? And I've always been confused about, it's like a toss-up between a chiropractor and a physiotherapist. So Dr. Shaisa Naransamy will be online to talk about the importance of chiropractics. And last but not least, one of my favorite people, and I can very safely refer to him as a friend, and that is Khalid Jassat. He's an NLP coach, and we're going to ask him, what does our world look like? Or what can we expect the changes to look like post-COVID? I don't think there's ever going to be a post-COVID for at least 2 more years. We'll probably reach normalization levels at the end of 2022, but who knows? Allah is the best of planners. So let's get cracking onto our first interview, and that is Nadia Sigaba. She is with the EFF and lots to talk to her about. Nadia, are you there? Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to the program. Hey there. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear.
Okay, I've just lost you there. Walaikum salam. How are you, my darling?
I'm fine. How are you?
Good to have you on the show. I'm very, very good indeed. Now, I was reading a little bit about you, a very brief bio, and I must say I'm blown away. And very especially since you're focusing on issues around youth unemployment, and how that's tied in with social cohesion, how that's tied in with how the political landscape starts unfolding. And I guess this is something that world populations have been wrestling with from the beginning of time, and this will be with us till the end of time. So we're going to try and unpack all of that in a little while. But first and foremost, let's talk a little bit about your work as a researcher at the EFF. I also know you've written extensively on what we're going to uncover, that is student movements in the country dating back to the Soweto uprisings. And just park that in your mind. Is that still relevant today? Is it still a question we should be asking today? And of course, municipality governance research in various regions. How does that serve the EFF's mandate? Is this not something, it jumps out at me, is this not something that the ANC government should be wrestling with? And just so much more. I don't want to take up the airtime. It's your time. You're here to give us all of the answers. So let's start with you, Nadia. Why have you found yourself in this space? Why is it so close to your heart? I can see you're a very young person, alhamdulillah. Um, but there must be forces, there must have been life-changing moments for you to embark on this path.
Yeah, Assalamu alaikum to you, Julie, and your listeners. Thank you for having me on your show. It's an honor and a pleasure to be here. And also to be talking about myself and what I do and what I specialize in, which is research. So just to introduce the topic, I think it's important for me as a young person to be in this space because there's not a lot of us who want to look into the history of student movements, particularly in the country, and how they influence the political landscape and also the economic landscape, as we saw with the Fees Must Fall, with students were calling for a 0% increase in the school fees in 2015. Obviously, the fees must fall was tied to a lot of racial issues and also economic division issues. And we see that today because there's a lot of youth unemployment. The majority of the population of this country is young people between the ages of 18 and 35. So ordinarily, youth unemployment is a big thing in the country. And I'm in the EFF as a researcher because I believe in their manifesto. They talk a lot about youth unemployment and how to eradicate poverty and unemployment in the country. If you look at the 2016 and 2015 manifestos, they talk a lot about social cohesion, the same topic that we'll be talking about today, as well as how to solve the problem of youth unemployment. I mean, currently, almost 40% of the country's population is active job seekers um, uh, who are not finding employment in the country. So I think it's important for us to have this topic and to have a discussion around it, and also have different organizations having a contribution on how to solve the problem of youth unemployment in the country. I don't think it should be something that should be left only to political parties. I think as a society we've allowed government enough space, and they have proved to have failed in as far as carrying the discussion around youth unemployment and creating, um, you know, um, opportunities for work within the country. So it's important that Salam Media and other organizations have this discussion openly, so that we can have more people talking about it and we can find more positive opportunities for young people in the country.
Nadia, I don't think we're going to have enough time to do justice to this interview, but let's see how far we go. Because as you speak, more and more questions pop into my mind. The issue around land, distribution, or, the whole land issue. Do you think if approached in the right way, intelligently, in collaboration with all the role players, and putting great minds at work around the land redistribution issue, might just address the unemployment issue, number one. And I do know when we talk land redistribution, we are talking farmlands, rural areas, but there's great potential in farming, is there not? And are our young people going to be satisfied enough with that sort of a scenario, or are they chasing degrees and wanting to be employed in those said professions?
Yeah, I think there's a certain culture that has been created within our institutions of higher learning as well, of creating the expectation of employment after graduation. So we go to universities expecting that once we graduate, we'll get a job. I mean, I'm speaking from experience. When I was doing my degree in international relations, I assumed that once I graduate, there'll be a job waiting for me because I'm a graduate. But we also need to look at scarce skills in the country. That's one of the most important things when we guiding young people into job careers. Land expropriation without compensation is one of the first pillars of the EFF, and it's one that we have dedicated ourselves to, especially with even putting a motion in Parliament that has led to public hearings across the country, where we've heard people expressing themselves about how access to land will help them to create viable ways of living. Farming is one of them. Land ownership is one of them. And we know that land ownership can easily allow people to start businesses from home. If you have your own land and if you have your own home, you are able to turn your house into a business. So that's one of the things that I'm saying, that land expropriation without compensation is one of the important pillars that we need to implement in this country. And I think delaying it will only exacerbate the unemployment problems that we have.
What's
So
the delay? What's holding you back?
what is the delay is that the Parliament hasn't sat to approve the ad hoc committee that is dealing with the motion on expropriation of land without compensation, hasn't sat to deliberate on the public hearing and to come up with a conclusion as to what is the public saying in terms of land expropriation without compensation. But I can tell you, from having attended some of the public hearings and having listened to them, majority of South Africans are saying that land needs to be expropriated without compensation. So it's a legal matter of having to amend Section 18. The 18th Amendment of the Constitution, which is Section 25 of the Constitution. So it's important that we have open discussions about how is access to land going to create jobs. I know as the EFF, we speak a lot about economic zones, creating economic zones around particularly the metros, where you have young people being engaged in different forms of business, small business enterprises, supporting them. I know because I work in the Gauteng provincial legislature, there's business opportunities for young people. There's a Gauteng Enterprise Propeller, which assists young people with developing their own businesses. It gives them funding. And a lot of people don't know about these business opportunities, and ways in which they can create employment for others. So we are a very job orientated country instead of being a business orientated country where we encourage young people to be business owners instead of job seekers. So that is one of the ways in which we can alleviate unemployment, is to encourage young people to take up degrees that will lead them into creating business opportunities like agriculture, infrastructure development, which is your engineering, civil engineering, um, those kinds of jobs those kinds of degrees that are lacking in the country, that are scarce, particularly for Black African people in the country. They're not well exposed to those industries in the country. So I think land ownership is one of the ways in which we can penetrate, and alleviate unemployment and joblessness in the country.
We we as ordinary South Africans bemoan the fact that crime levels are very high in the country. And we know, I mean, it doesn't take rocket science to figure out why. I'm not justifying crime levels, but obviously, if there are not enough jobs going around, depending on the seriousness of a person's situation, just how desperate they are in terms of putting food on the table, they might turn to a life of crime. That's the one end of the spectrum. The other end of the spectrum is state capture. How badly has that hurt us, and how seriously is government taking the whole issue, state capture? What is the message getting across to the youth of the country? How are they viewing the issue around state capture? In the past, in the time of Zuma's tenure, you kind of heard figures in the millions. Now you're hearing figures in the billions and the trillions, and it is absolutely sickening. But for young unemployed people, I'm just wondering what damaging message is getting across to them in terms of, I'm educated, or even if I'm not educated, I'm looking for a job to feed my family and to lead a decent life, to lead a life away from criminality, And then we see the excess, we see this whole state capture saga playing out. What's the EFF stance on this? And you as a researcher, what's your thoughts on it?
I lost you there for a second, but I think I heard.
You got the gist of it.
Much of yeah. I think, state capture is one of the exposés of what happens with politicians. It exposed what happens behind closed doors when it comes to corruption in the country. And it also exposed the weakness of our Section 9 bodies in the country, like the NPA and the Public Protector's Office, in playing a role in prosecuting criminal activity within government. So I think one of the things that we need to do going forward is strengthen our Chapter 9 institutions and giving them the constitutional right to prosecute independently people who have, even now we see with the...
All right, let me ask you this. Can I just interrupt you here? We have to go for an ad break. I'm going to leave you with a thought, and I'd like you to respond when we come back. Do you think that the whole disgusting state capture saga, as it's playing out with every new day, brings new issues to the table? How is that impacting on youth unemployment? I'd like you to respond right after the ad break.
Okay.
They say breakfast is the most important meal of the day, yet many children go to school hungry because of poverty. Penny Appeal's Breakfast Club aim to get a warm, hearty meal to underprivileged children so they can spend the day prospering in their schoolwork. Help feed a needy learner by visiting our website on www.pennyappeal.org.za or call 031 1100 573 to find out how you can donate. Penny Appeal. Small change, big difference.
With over 80 years of experience, IG Hussein and Company are renowned for their quality Islamic wear and goods. IG Hussein and Company stock a variety of Islamic items, musallas, kitabs, Medina dates, perfumes and exclusive gifts. We guarantee you a unique and friendly shopping experience for the entire family. Visit our new branch in Overport at 202 Kenilworth Park, Brickfield Road. Open 7 days a week with ample parking and wheelchair friendly. Like us on Facebook or Instagram at IG Hussein for our latest promotions and updates. IG Hussein and Company, your Islamic lifestyle.
Fabric Direct, now open at 224 Brickfield Road, Overport, Durban, offering you a variety of dress fabrics, curtaining, upholstery, wallpaper, and deco. Fabric Direct, quality, price, and a range that speaks for itself. 224 Brickfield Road, Overport, Durban. Fabric Direct, definitely worth a visit.
Connect and stay ahead with Salam Media. This is Salam Media, coming to you live from South Africa.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Welcome back. I'm talking to Nadia Sigaba. She's with the EFF. She's a researcher. She's done extensive work on the studies, development studies and coloniality research. She's also written on student movements in the country dating back to the Soweto uprising. She has also written on the Palestinian-Israeli conflict as part of the experience in visiting territories. And I also understand that this amazing young woman is going to be working on her PhD soon, and that is on the development and making of the African middle class in post-apartheid South Africa. And that is why I said there isn't going to be enough time to uncover absolutely everything I want to uncover with you. Welcome back, Nadia. Do you want to respond to the question just before the ad break?
Yes. I think corruption in the country is also laced in the procurement architecture of it. So if you look at our procurement processes, they allow for a lot of corruption to take place. The tendering system in our country is very flawed, and we have seen also with state capture just how flawed that system is, where companies have been paid billions without doing any work or services, or without providing any services towards governance in the country. So one of the things as the EFF we propagate is for the abolishment of tenders and to capacitate the state, which will then also drive into employment opportunities for young people. The purpose behind abolishing tenders is to eliminate precisely this idea of having selected companies or corruption taking place with certain companies that belong to certain individuals being given preference over certain tenders. Also, about that, I think corruption is also very prevalent, not only in the public sector in government, but also in the private sector. So you see that young people are also being gatekept from getting opportunities of employment in the private sector, where the priorities are, proximity to the owners of a certain company, for example. So those are some of the things that we need to look into. So when we look at the Employment Equity Act, those are some of the regulations or legislation that are important in making sure that young people have a fair opportunity to or access to jobs, that there's no discrimination based on race, gender, and sexuality when it comes to employment opportunities. And I think one of also from the manifesto of the EFF, we propose that the National Prosecuting Authority should be a Chapter 9 institution so that it can be accountable not to the police minister, but to Parliament itself, which then gives it a greater sense of independency and allows it not to have influence from politicians in which cases are being prioritized for prosecution. Because if you look at the state capture, we haven't heard any prosecutions, but there has been a lot of accusations of people laundering money and stealing money from government. But there are no prosecutions because the NPA itself as an institution is not independent. So those are some of the things that are taking back from, having political stability in the country, where, we have protests every now and again over issues that are related to capture.
How does that speak to unemployment and political instability? Is it all tied together?
Of course it is. Unemployment is tied to corruption. I mean, when there's corruption, it means that opportunities are in favor of certain individuals. And even nepotism becomes prevalent in corruption. So you find that when individuals apply for certain business opportunities or certain job opportunities, they're not considered because they don't know the HR manager, for example, or they don't know the director of the company or the director of the department where they're applying. So those are some of the things that hinder employment opportunities. It's nepotism, corruption, and political instability in the country. Continued protests have a disruption on projects that are taking place. If there are protests that are taking place about service delivery, they have a potential to disrupt a project where people are being employed, and you find that workers are not able to attend to their job. because of that. So those things contribute to unemployment and political instability in the country. And what can bring social cohesion is having to make sure that people have access to land, that we abolish the tender system to allow greater opportunities and to enhance the effectiveness and efficiency of government in procuring its own, sort of materials and, having to execute its own projects, particularly infrastructure. A lot of infrastructure projects are outsourced to construction companies. Government could have its own construction company, for example, where it outsources to different departments that kind of service of building schools, building houses, human settlement houses. So those kinds of mechanisms will assist in providing social cohesion and creating job opportunities within millions of job opportunities within the country.
Well, it hasn't been tested yet. Let's hope that it's put to the test and see whether it can work. Because I'm thinking, even in government circles, things can go so horribly wrong. But that being said, let's look at your PhD subject, which is the making of the African middle class in post-apartheid South Africa. Are you worried almost 24 odd years later, we have a small African elite, a group of South African elitists, very, very, very rich, and a very small or possibly a growing number of middle class? What has gone so wrong here? And what is holding back a bigger growth of Black middle class South Africans?
Okay, the study is derived from my observation of the outsourcing must fall movement, where we saw the insourcing of thousands of securities and cleaners around the country, and garden services, catering services. And it led me to understand that there is a huge gap between the African elite and the working class within the country. Now, between the working class and the middle class, it's not so much of a huge margin of difference. The only margin of difference is access to credit. Now, the middle class is in my observation and in my study, it's a group of people who have been given access to credit, which is access to housing on bond credit, vehicles on financing, and all sorts of credit facilities. So their wealth is revolved around interest and credit. It's not so much wealth. They don't have access to land. So they're not like the elite who have access to land, have access to wealth through business opportunities. And the working class are a group of people who are treated somewhat as subhuman beings.
So that talks directly to the whole land redistribution without compensation issue. It talks directly to that, does it not?
Yeah.
How soon can
yes.
we see this starting to happen? Because the sooner it happens, hopefully the unemployment rates will start dropping. Hopefully criminality and corruption will start easing up. I don't know if that's wishful thinking. I don't know if that's idealistic thinking. I'm not sure.
The problem with amending Section 25 of the Constitution, it's a matter of legal wording. It's to say that land can be expropriated, and the court gets to decide whether it's with or compensation or without compensation. So that is those are the two different sort of proposals that were presented to the ad hoc committee to say, is it with compensation or without compensation? Now there's an element of saying that the courts get to decide as to whether it is with compensation or without compensation. Now, the problem with that, saying that the courts get to decide, it's also got to do with access to courts. Middle class people will have access to courts because they have ability to pay for legal services. The poor working class will not have access to courts, therefore land expropriation without compensation may not necessarily be a reality for them. So it becomes a very difficult thing to just for Parliament to decide where does this Section 25 then fit in, and there's different proposals from different political parties, and I think for me there's a lack of political will from the ANC in terms of saying there should be land expropriation without compensation. They use semantics like land reform, land diversity, diversifying the land and making sure that, and using the Freedom Charter as a pillar to say that the land shall belong to those who work it. And, when you read the Freedom Charter and it says that majority of the people don't work the land. So who are those who work it, who have access to that land? So there's a lot of semantics around land expropriation without compensation. And I don't know if there will ever be, an agreement in terms of how each political party views land expropriation and land reform in the country. So that poses a problem because the working class then will have to wait for government to give them shares of land through housing, through RDP housing projects. And as we have seen, the RDP project since 1994 has failed dismally to, deliver housing to majority of South Africans. Many of them are living in informal settlements and they are forming informal settlements. And those informal settlements, some of them are not even documented. So we don't even know how many people are without proper housing and proper sanitation in the country.
Okay,
but we know
Nadia,
that there's a lot of
2 more questions and then we're going to wrap up. The whole issue around land redistribution or expropriation, whichever wording you're comfortable with, without or with compensation, whichever ruling will eventually be decided upon. Are you as the EFF not afraid that we're going to replicate Zimbabwe's story right here in South Africa by going that route?
Well, no. The whole point of having, the nice thing about South Africa is that we have a very active democracy. So when we say land expropriation without compensation, we are saying that the state should be the custodian of the land. It should be documented in the constitution that the state will be the one responsible for the redistribution of the land. So the state gets to decide who will get access to land, for what reason, and people will then get to apply to use that land for a certain period, as opposed to having the privatization of land. Where
okay, so it's not going to be it's not going to be passed down from generation to generation.
No.
All right, my final question. Yes, finish that thought and then I'll ask you my final question.
Yeah, it prevents this generational wealth that we see happening where some people have access to land and some people don't have access to land, and the continued access to land, that is.
Okay, finally, you have written on the Palestinian-Israeli conflict as part of your experience when you visited the territories. What can you tell us about that? How do you see that conflict eventually playing out? Do you think they're going to ever have a happily ever after? Are they ever going to reach a situation that we have realized in South Africa? We aren't over our problems yet, but thank God we're in a better position than lots of other countries around the world. We've had a very peaceful transition. Yes, we're grappling with a whole host of issues, but I have no doubt in my mind that we'll be able to overcome.
Yeah, I think the Palestinian-Israeli conflict is a very unique one. When I went there, I don't know if you've read the article. It was a very traumatic experience for me because I felt that I was seeing apartheid
back again.
Yeah, I went to experience what apartheid was like for people in South Africa, and I realized that there is no political will from the international community to ensure that conflict comes to an end. I mean, the arrogance of Israel in declaring Jerusalem as its major city is just shows just how they have the political backing of the international community or the major players within the international community, which is the United States and the Middle East, in entrenching its apartheid. So for me, I feel like it's going to take many years, and it's going to take a political will from countries that support uh, Palestine. And I think the United Nations is also not playing a deliberate role in ensuring that crimes against humanity, that Israel is prosecuted for the crimes against humanity that have taken place in that country over the past couple of years. And I think the United Security Council also is not strong enough in prosecuting Israel for the things that are happening, because there's literally no infrastructure in Palestine. There's no infrastructure development. There's no proper government in place. There's no proper sanitation. There's no proper housing. It's just it looks like
A forgotten
dead,
people. A forgotten people.
Yes.
Nadia, that's where we have to leave it. It was wonderful talking to you. Thank you indeed. And we will hook up with you again sometime in the future. Go well, and salam alaikum to you.
Walaikum salam.